Welcome to a community update from the Department of Senior Affairs. I'm your host, Ed Nunez. Today's title of the show is the What's and Whys of Pre-Planning Funerals, and with us to discuss that is Mark Ballard, who is the Director of Sales and Advanced Planning, and Carla Barella, who is the Advanced Planning Consultant, both of them from French Funerals and Cremation. And welcome to both of you.
Oh, thank you very much, Ed.
I got to say this too. I'm thinking about this on the way over. It's not something that people really want to think about, but I got to say this: they should, because we're all mortal. We're all going to eventually someday. When we talk about seniors, we're not certainly saying today or tomorrow. We want to live a long, beautiful life. Everyone has that goal. I think I told you my mother passed away in May. She was 91 years old. I used to tease my mom and say I probably won't make 90. And when my mother made 90, and she still had a solid life until about the last 2 weeks. So we all want to live a long life, and we'll think we'll be here forever. The reality is we won't. We're not trying to be dark and gloomy here. This is just reality. I want to say that before, because people might think, why are you talking about that? Because you should,
right?
Because it's going to happen. Because you might be able to save some money and some by planning ahead. And with that, I want to ask Mark. The first question I have for you is, why pre-plan?
Yeah, why pre-planning is a great question, and we get that all the time. And to go back to what you were just saying, that a lot of people, it's the last thing they will talk about. They will do anything else they have to do before they talk about pre-planning. And pre-planning offers so many benefits that it becomes a really good integral part of a comprehensive retirement plan. It helps you be able to have a voice in what you want to have done, so your family doesn't emotionally overspend, which can happen when you wait until the time they pass away. Because sometimes people will spend more money out of the fact that they miss somebody, and they could always have more money put in that plan. They were able to save money because they're able to lock their costs down at today's prices and be able to save that money, because usually the funeral will double every 7 to 10 years. And so that's a really substantial amount of money that they could be saving. They were able to sit there and tell their families that it's been taken care of, and then you don't have to worry about it at the time of passing when it does come up. So there's a lot of benefits involved. There's a peace of mind knowing that it is done. There's probably savings of anywhere between easily sometimes 50 to 60%, because we do get situations where someone will come to us and had a plan 10 years ago, and we pull it up and we go, oh my goodness, I can't believe what you're saving right now. Because what happens with pre-planning is you're able to guarantee what you have now. Even if 10 or 20 years down the road you pass away, you will get the items you picked out, and it will not cost the family any more money, because the funeral home will pick up the difference of that.
Okay, I think that's important. One of the things you just saying about that, again, that's not something people want to talk about, but I think it's I think one thing you said is emotionally overspending, and people it's an emotional experience. I don't care. My mom was 91, but there's a lot of emotion even 3 months later still, and so I think that's important that people. Of course it is. These are people that are you're right. My mom would tell me things, and I'd probably half listen because you never see that day. Yeah. But it's coming for everybody. So, not today, not tomorrow, we don't know. That's the thing, we're not trying to
sometimes more sudden than we realize.
Exactly. I think there's a point to that, and I think that sometimes I'll read a paper and I'll say, what happened to that 28-year-old young person? What happened to that 35-year-old seemingly healthy? So we don't know. That's the other thing, we don't know. But Carla, what is pre-planning? What is that?
I just want to make a comment on something you said. Life can change in a moment. And I think that it's important for us to realize that. And what pre-planning is, it's meeting with a consultant to go over all of your wishes. What is it you want? And putting it all on paper so that your family knows what it is that you want. And that's what we do. We meet with families. There's 8 of us who work together. We have 2 and 3 appointments every day, so there's a lot of interest in getting this done. So we put all your wishes on paper, we decide what you want. Many times when people walk in, they think the only decision I have to make is whether I want a burial or cremation, but there's so much more to it than that, than just making that decision. We put everything on paper, we decide what you want, we tell you what it's going to cost, then you make the decision as to what you want to do from there. Okay. And it truly is a gift for your loved ones.
Okay, yeah, I think so, and we'll get into the reasons in a minute here, but why people pre-plan. I mean, it saves money, the whole thing like that, and some people might be terminally ill. They might pre-plan as a result of that. But some people some people are very diligent about financial issues. They don't want their families later to suffer, or not suffer, but have to worry about that. And it is, it is an expense. There's no doubt about it. It can be, you just mentioned funerals. What did you say, 7 to 10% they go up, or
They'll double every 7 to 10 years.
7 to 10 years. Yeah. So, I mentioned either my father bought plots for my mother and himself back in 1989. He died in 1990. You never know. And at the time, I told you we made a joke about that, but my father had some saved, when my mother passed away, saved us $5,000. So with that insight,
sure.
Although we used to call him Diamond Jim, because that guy was a penny. But I say that with the most affection. He grew up in the Depression, didn't have anything.
Right.
So I say that with the most affection. But you mentioned that about pre-planning, Carla. What are the most common reasons people do pre-plan?
Well, the number one reason is so that your family doesn't have that burden. It's a very I remember the day after my dad died. My mother and I spent what felt like the whole day at the funeral home making his arrangements. It may not have been the whole day, but here 25 years later, that's how it felt. And you take the emotional burden off your family, you get what you want. Your kids aren't sitting there wondering, what is it Mom and Dad wanted? When it's all on paper, it's all paid for, you get exactly what you want. It also addresses the financial aspect with, in most cases, it being paid in advance. Mark, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, because one of the things in the pre-planning process, even like Carla mentioned earlier too, is that we also sit down with the families and we help record family information too. What was your mom's maiden name? What was your dad's maiden name? How many sisters? Where do they live now? What are their phone numbers? Because we want to make sure that all the contact information is in there. There's also that, Carla keeps talking about the emotional part of it. If you can imagine many of our families as they sit down with their pre-planner, and when they're done, they're so relieved because there's such a peace of mind that comes over them going, I don't have to worry about anything else right now. If you can imagine the day of death when something happens and somebody walks in and says, okay, what do we have to do for Dad today? And the funeral director says to him, there's nothing you have to do. He already pre-planned all this. It's all been taken care of. We want you to go home, see about the families that are members that are coming in, where they're going to stay, where they're going to be eating at, who's going to be getting together, who's going to read the sermon, what about meeting with the priest if that applies, or where the actual gathering is going to be. But to sit there and have a funeral director say, you're okay, we're going to take care of your mom or your dad, and everything's been taken care of. That part there's no money aspect on that at all that you can be granted to somebody. And it's a great gift that someone can give their family when they sit there and say, I've taken care of all that. You don't have to worry about it.
Well, you're not kidding, sure. I remember, again, when my mother, passed away, and my mother-in-law about 6 years ago. It's the same. You're right. There's a lot of emotional capital invested in that. You want to make sure that all the details are taken care of, and I think pre-planning that would eliminate at least 50% of that. Maybe, that it's already taken care of. The casket, the procession, the limousine, the
obituary. Yeah. Insurance forms, who to file claims with, Social Security. There's over 100 things to do when someone passes away. And you actually take care of almost 80 to 90% of that when you pre-plan.
Yeah, so I think the next question I wanted to ask Mark is, I heard the pre-planning is insurance. Can you explain that?
Absolutely, it's a great question. Across the U.S., funeral homes can either decide to have a trust in their own name and in the funeral name, and they will take the monies from the pre-planned policies and manage them and take care of them. There's also, you can apply it under insurance law, where basically you have to have an insurance rider to protect those funds should something ever happen to the funeral home. And then there are some states that do both. In New Mexico, back in the late 80s, they adopted the insurance law, which we're very happy that they do it because it protects the family's monies. And so though we may have a family come in and go, I have enough insurance, I don't need another insurance policy. A funeral pre-plan is the only plan that when you make it irrevocable, Medicaid can't touch it. So on a Medicaid spend-down situation, then they go through your assets and they're trying to determine which ones you have to liquidate, which ones you don't. They can't touch a funeral pre-plan. So we have many families that come to us and say, Mom's about to go into Medicaid, what do? We want to get a funeral pre-plan for her. So those are some of the many aspects of it. And that law basically says that that policy is yours. The funeral home does not own it. They only perform the services of it. We're just a rendering of the services is all it is. And so when those monies go into that insurance policy, it's your money, it's protected, should something ever happen to the funeral home. And it's a wonderful law, and we absolutely fully support it. So
how long has that law been in effect?
In New Mexico since about 1986.
Okay, yeah, before that, so anything was,
Yeah, and unfortunately we had that incident happen here, you know, and it was one of those sad situations. So I was really happy to hear that the state adopted that law.
okay, yeah, and that was in 1986, that was 30 years ago. So that was a very important law. I don't know if this question is for either one of you. You said that this is insurance. Are there age limitations to pre-planning? I wouldn't think there is, but is there?
Carl?
There are no age limitations. We've pre-planned for even children. We've had grandmothers come in and say, I want to do this for my grandchildren. We've had children, the youngest person I've ever pre-planned for was 18, and I've pre-planned for people in their mid to late 90s also. So there is no age limitation on that.
Okay, now you would think probably the pre-planning is going to be done by, we think that would be done by more elderly people, seniors, you would think.
Our average age right now of our pre-planning insurance people runs about 72, and I can tell you that 3 years ago it was 75. So it's actually getting younger because the boomers are realizing I need to take care of this. I want to make sure this is taken care of. I don't have to worry about it.
Back in the day, I'm sure, 25, 30, maybe 35 years ago, that wasn't even thought of pre-planning, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It just, if it happened, when it happened, you just dealt with it.
Yeah, and we do get people ask us, I don't understand what pre-plan means. And when we explain to them, they go, that makes sense. I didn't know that you could do that. And so we're able to fulfill that wishes for them.
Yeah, again, it's a tough topic, but again, these things have to be discussed. They have to be discussed, and again, they might save somebody, a lot of money and time. Really, because those, we mentioned funerals, the average cost of a funeral, Mark, what is the average cost?
If a burial funeral can run anywhere from $7,000 up to $10,000, $11,000.
So, yeah, and again, if you're investing emotional capital, it could be 12 to 15.
Yeah, and in a funeral home pre-plan policy, 80% of that policy is guaranteed. Those are guaranteed services that are provided by the funeral home. So they control the cost. So by you coming in and saying, I'm going to have a pre-plan with this funeral home, they're basically saying we're going to guarantee those items. The other 20% are taxes and flowers and things that the funeral home does not control. So those may go up over time, but I can tell you the difference of those non-guaranteeds going up over years doesn't anywhere come near what the rise in guaranteed items may do if you don't pre-plan. So.
Very interesting. There's a lot of reasons why you should. I think I already have insurance for my funeral. As we go over this, why do I need to pre-plan?
Many people think, well, I'll give you another personal experience. My mother had insurance. She thought that would be used for her funeral and to leave us some money, but it didn't work out that way. She ended up in a nursing home, and that insurance policy had to be cashed in. So as Mark mentioned earlier, when she went on Medicaid, we had to cash that in. So that money that she thought was going to go for her funeral and other reasons was not there for the purpose she intended. Many times people tell us, I have insurance. Many times when people get old, a lot of that money goes towards paying hospital bills. And when someone meets with a funeral home, they expect payment that day. And those insurance companies, it usually takes, anywhere from 30 to 60 days to get reimbursed for that amount, for the money.
Approximately 70% of all deaths occur at a hospital. As you can understand,
Right.
I feel sick, I need to go to hospital. So you're going to have hospital bills. And usually what we tell people, and we advise them, is that insurance is for the living. The pre-planning is for when you pass away. And so as Carla mentioned, when they do pass away and they go to the insurance company of an insurance policy they may have set aside for that, they're going to say, I'd like to get those funds. And the funeral home says, no problem, we'll go ahead and try and recuperate those funds. A lot of funeral homes will actually have what they call a fee assessed against that for the recovery of those funds from the insurance policy. So it could be anywhere from 3 to 5% sometimes. And that's money that really should go to the family. And then the family's going to have to go into the funeral home and start the process of picking out the casket or the urn or whatever the process is that they want to do according to the disposition that family wants for that loved one. And they're going to have to go through that emotional process of dealing with all that, while also dealing with the hospital bills that came out of the hospital that they were dealing with, maybe some past due credit card debts or any other bills. So what's nice about a pre-planned insurance policy is that it's set aside just for that purpose only and nothing else. And it's one of the benefits of having that,
Right, and there's like you said, there's just so many things to think about when somebody, your loved one, passes away. So many things to think about. I see on television advertisements for final expense policy to pay for funerals. What is this?
Final expense is a term that they use for either a term or whole life policy that says you can basically buy an insurance policy that you can use towards a funeral when you pass away. And it's just an insurance policy. So when you do pass away, you're going to have to recover those funds, which is going to take some time. And funeral homes will expect payment at the time of death. That's just what it is in order to prepare everything else. And then they're going to have to still, again, sit down with the family and sit down with the funeral director, pick out the casket, pick out the urn. So you're not pre-planning that process ahead of time. You're not guaranteeing any costs. You're going to pay current day pricing, which is going to cost more money. And so the family's going to have to go through that whole anguish with final expense policy. So people do get confused when they hear the term final expense. They think it's the same thing as a pre-plan, and it's not. With a pre-plan, again, you go into a funeral home, you're able to pick out what you want, you're guaranteed your items, and for any reason that item is not available, they need to meet, or they will either be an equal item or greater than will be supplied to the family. So if for some reason there's a casket that went out of stock or hasn't been made anymore, the value of what you purchase is not going to cost the family anymore at all. And so
I
the
see.
funeral home will pick up that cost.
Okay.
The final expense policy is just an insurance policy is what it is.
Right, but
So-
you're still getting today's costs, you know.
You're going to have to
whatever
still
it
sit
was
down
that
with the
you
funeral
signed up
director when it
for.
happens. You're going to have to go through that pain and go through that anguish that goes on with that final expense policy.
Okay. What is a Medicaid spin-down?
Medicaid Spindown is basically you have no more funds to pay for your bills, to stay in a nursing home. And Medicaid requires that you have no more than $2,000 in assets if you want to have the assistance of Medicaid.
Oh, that's right.
And people come in all the time to the funeral home and say, I have to cash in this insurance policy for X amount of dollars, and I need to do a Medicaid spend down to qualify my mom or dad for Medicaid. When we do that, a requirement with Medicaid is to make that an irrevocable policy, which means that money can only be used for funeral planning. And that is what qualifies them for Medicaid if they're having to do a Medicaid spend down.
I see. Yeah, there's, again, yeah, I remember that, discussing that about my mom. The
If
spend
I
down.
may, irrevocability means that you can't cash out or you can't take a loan against it. You're just going to use it for the funeral. That's
Okay.
what it means. And so the customer is given the option to deem that irrevocable, which protects it.
Okay, all right. I think that, yeah, I remember some of that with my own mom. I remember that. Do I, again, this is a good, real key question here. Do I have to pay up front, or can I go on a payment plan? People are going to want to know that too.
Well, you have the option. You have several options. Some people are able to make a single payment. Some people can go 90 days, same as cash, and pay it. As long as they pay within 90 days, they pay nothing additional. But anytime you pay on time, you're always going to pay more. And so, or some people choose to go on a monthly payment plan for 3, 5, 10, or 20 years. But the good thing about that is once they've made that payment, if something should happen to them, the policy is paid in full.
Okay.
So,
During the terms.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's good. And I think this is another question too, because a lot of people do this. What if I move where my children and my grandchildren live? Does that, how does that affect my plan? Or if I paid for a plan, how does that affect that?
Your policy is fully transferable. You own the policy. So if you should happen to move to another state, all you need to do is contact a funeral home at that state and say, I'd like to have my policy moved. They contact us, and we transfer the policy over to that funeral home.
Even if it's not a French's, they go.
And there's always a question that comes up is, are the same prices applicable to the new funeral home? Most of the time, I can tell you it's anywhere between 70 to 80% they honor it. It is up to the funeral home to go over those pricings. They may say, look, by the way, our embalming rate is a little bit higher than that. So what they'll do is you'll have to pay a little bit of a difference sometimes. But a lot of times they'll just honor the actual policy that was
70
enforced.
80% of the time.
Huh?
70 to 80% of the time, you said.
Yes, they will.
That's
Yeah.
important. Yeah,
Right.
because people do move.
Yeah, I agree.
They move with their families, and they do things like that. And if you have a plan that's already paid for, you want to know.
Yeah, your
if
tax
that's
rate
gonna
may be different there or something
Florida's
like that.
tax rate is
Sure.
different than New Mexico's. I think the other question is, what if I pass away while traveling? If I'm out of the USA, how does that affect?
That's a really good question. Most funeral homes have a program such as ours, which is called out-of-area protection, which means if you're 75 miles or more away from home, anywhere in the world, you're guaranteed, once you've done your pre-planning, you can purchase this, and you're guaranteed being brought back to your city of residence. So,
Okay.
yeah.
At no
and-
cost.
At no cost. My seamstress, her husband died in Bogota, Colombia. It cost her over $10,000 to get his body back to Albuquerque. That's pretty pricey to have to pay that.
Jeez, yeah, just, yeah.
8 years ago, a good
Wow.
friend of mine went from Phoenix on a business trip to South Carolina and had a massive heart attack. Not only did his daughters have to deal with the emotional part that their dad just died and have to make all the arrangements, they had to pay over $2,500 8 years ago to get him home.
Oh, to ship him back?
With this type of program, it's all covered. You call a 1-800 number, they make all the arrangements, they get all the permits, they get dad back home.
So you don't have to worry about that added expense.
Yeah, and depending on the funeral home, that cost of that policy out of area protection plan can range anywhere from $400 to maybe $600. That's it.
Wow, there's so many things. Those things definitely could happen. You could be, there's no time or date, and it's not going to say, well, it's not going to happen just because you left New Mexico. It's going to happen. Nobody has.
I know.
Nobody has any control on that.
Yeah.
So those are things I think people are going to want to know about too, because you never know, right? We have
Correct.
no idea. I heard my friend say that their mom pre-planned, but we had to pay another $300 when she died.
Right. That goes back to when I mentioned to you about the 80-20 rule in the policy, where 80% are guaranteed, 20% are not. So I'm assuming, not knowing or looking at the policy, I'm just going to assume or guess that probably the tax rate went up, probably the flowers that they picked out, the amount of money that they put aside didn't cost enough. They may have had a reception in there that they wanted to have, or some food provided. Well, that cost is not controlled by the funeral home, so those items are going to go up. So, I mean, a $300 difference from the time of when she did have it isn't unusual, depending if it's probably 4 or 5 years difference.
Right. And you mentioned that average funeral is $7,000 to $10,000. So $300, I understand, may be inconvenient, but it's certainly better than $8,500 that you should be paying, or
Right.
$9,000.
Sure.
So $300. Those things can happen. You mentioned tax rates. Things change as far as adjusted for inflation, things like that. I want to another thing. A lot of people want to do this. I want to donate my body to science and organ transplant. How do you do that?
Well, what we find is that they may or may not want you. And what I mean by that, if you die young, they probably do want you. But if you've had a lot of disease and depending on your health condition, they may not want you. And so we always tell people, have a backup plan. Even if you do that, have a backup plan, because when you do pre-planning, if there are any unused funds, let's say you didn't use your funeral home, that money will go back to whoever's named as a beneficiary, because this is an insurance policy. Same with organ transplant. They could take your liver, they could take your kidneys, but what's going to happen with the rest of you? You still need to have a backup plan.
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And there are people that, of course, donate their bodies and things, but that makes sense too. They may not,
nowadays they're
may
using.
not want you.
They're using electronic cadavers now, so they're not using so many live cadavers anymore. And so, like Carla said, depending on your BMI, your cause of death,
Interesting.
the condition of your body at the time of death, it depends on what they need at that time. And I think it's still something that people want to do that, they should do that. But it's important that you have a plan B, because the last thing you want to do is have your family sitting there going, I'm sorry, but we're not going to accept your loved one right now. We're not in need of this right now. And then they're going to have to go through the funeral director. They're going to have to go and sit down and pick out what you want. So having a plan B is real important to have. So.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense too. I didn't know they were doing that with electronic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course, everything's changed, though. I shouldn't be surprised. Is a service important?
That's a great question. We hear this from a lot of people. And when they ask my opinion, yes, I work for the industry, and I'm going to say, yes, it is important. But I'll tell you why I think it's important. And that is that when people pass away, many of us know someone that had passed away, and the first thing we said was, when is the service? And then we find out there isn't a service, there's that loss we feel. I didn't have a chance to get together with other loved ones or with family and friends and say goodbye to that person, or have that chance just to have my chance to say goodbye. We found out that 70% of the people that attend a service really don't know the person or who passed away. They know the family and friends of the loved one that are there. They're there to support them during the next coming months or years while they go through the loss of that person not being no longer in their life. And that service gives them a safe environment to come together and just share stories. I mean, many of us have been to a service where we said, I didn't know Ed did that. I didn't know Ed was part of that. And so to bring people together to be able to grieve together and have the family or survivors to see that there were so many people. I mean, if you don't have a lot of people, even if you have just a few friends, but people want to come together and say goodbye in their own way, and just to say, you know what, he really made a good impression in my life. I just want to have that chance to say goodbye. We want to be able to start that process of grieving. And when you have a visual connection or a gathering to start, it helps you start that grieving process, which helps people heal better.
Interesting, because I think you're probably right about that. My mother, I mentioned, was 91. She had a lot of, for a 91-year-old lady, she had touched a lot of people's lives, and I think that people were able to do that, celebrate her life, and the readings that we picked out were good. She finished one verses where I will finish the game. And my mother sure did, man. Sure did it. 91, she finished that. I thought about it later. I was like, boy, no one, embodied that more than our mother. My brother, my sister, as well. And she sure did finish that game, man. She sure did. 91 years old, and she did finish that game. So I think you're right. People
I'm sure you had friends there that just came to be there for you and your family.
She touched so many lives, though. She really did, and it was about other people. It was never about her. She knew everything about you, and you didn't know much about her, but she wanted to know everything about you. And that's the impact she had. And you should say that about your mom. I mean, she was a very special lady, but I think you're right. The service I'm just thinking about, it's fresh in my mind still. It's only 3 months away, was 3 months ago. So it's still very fresh in my mind, and it was a beautiful service, and I thought we honored our loved one, like other people want to do that with their loved one.
It's such a nominal fee when you look at the years that someone has been on this earth or been part of this community or this family. It's something just to people to get together and just to say, I was affected and I really missed that person. Right,
and then you remember, like you said, stories that about that person, about what they did, and then you look in the obituary, and I find myself doing that. I'm 54.
We're at that age.
Yes, and I'm like, and some of these people I don't even know. Some of these people that I've seen those obituaries, I'm very touched. I'm like, wow, what an impact they must have had. And I don't even know these people.
Right.
But they had an impact somewhere. So I think you're right. Those services that you mentioned are very important.
We call it a celebration of life now. And it makes more sense.
You know what? I've been to some other services where it's just like, oh, you know what? We're gonna get a new. It's too bad. We're gonna get a new refrigerator. Like I just left with a real cold feeling
wow.
too. And only a couple of them, though. Only a couple. Only a couple. We just kind of like rocked me a little bit. Like, whoa, okay, but that's not everyone. You're not gonna go get 100% on that either.
No.
So one last question. Walk me through. We got about 2 minutes left in this segment here. Walk me through a scenario of what happens when a person passes without pre-planning without pre-planning and pre-planning.
Well, I touched a little bit on it earlier when I said about my dad. We spent literally the whole day at the funeral home making decisions, overspending. We were in an emotional state. That day is still a fog, but it felt like we were there all day. We had to do what Mark had mentioned earlier, fill out all the vital statistic information. We didn't have my dad's DD-214, which is military release papers. We had to go home to get them, bring them back. All of that just took a lot of time. But as Mark said earlier, when you pre-plan, we met with a funeral director like for my mom, and basically they just said, when do you want to do it? Let's arrange the time and the date. And it was a much better experience, much shorter experience. We were not in an emotional state when we pre-planned, so we were able to make good logical decisions rather than the scenario where you're doing this the day after you lose a loved one.
Emotional decisions, and we're all emotional about our loved ones, no doubt about it. About 30 seconds left. Wrap it up, this whole thing for me, why we should pre-plan and think about pre-planning. Wrap it up for us,
please. I think everybody should at least meet with the counselor at the funeral home and say, look, I want to find out more information about pre-planning. Give me the information I need. I think people should shop around because there's always a question as to how much I want to pay, what do I want to do. And then when you find a counselor or a consultant that you feel you really trust, bring back what you found out on your search and say, look, help me out, compare apples to apples. Tell me what I'm looking at here. And make that decision. And I think that sitting down and deciding to say, I really want to take care of this. Because we all think about it. We think about it a lot longer than we realize. And we let it go and we don't decide we're going to deal with it. And as I mentioned earlier, pre-planning helps become part of a really comprehensive retirement plan. And as the boomer generation is excelling right now, and it's the largest demographic we'll ever have, this is a really good time for you to decide, you know what, I really want to take care of that final step. Let's do this together, whether you do it with your loved ones, you do it with your spouse, your partner, whatever it may be, and make that decision together to get the information and to start a pre-plan. All you have to do is meet with a counselor. I'll tell you that your experience should be rewarding, it should be informative, and it should be fulfilling. And as long as you have those three aspects filled, take the step and go ahead and pre-plan.
Well, I just want to thank you both today, Mark Ballard, Director of Sales, Advanced Planning, and also Carla Barella, Advanced Planning Consultant from French Funerals and Cremations. Thanks for joining us for the What's and Whys of Pre-Planning. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you
you
as
for
well.
having us.
Have
You
a
bet.
great day.
For the Department of Senior Affairs, I'm Ed Nunez.